Hello everyone and welcome to re-entry. In this video I will be going through the EMS entry functionality as the command module enters the atmosphere. This is a tool that will be used as you go through the upper part of the atmosphere, through the entire atmosphere and all the way down to the phase where the altitude is low enough for the chutes and drogue chutes to do its job. So the entry monitoring system can be found on the upper part of the panel here, and it's typically set up as the procedures during entry. So there's two different checklists for entry, and that's if you're performing an entry from Earth orbit or if you're performing an entry from lunar orbit. So the lunar entry trajectory is at 36,300 feet per second at entry interface, while Earth entry is typically at about 25,500 feet per second at entry interface. I've made all of these checklists runnable, so you can just basically go in and say run. Most of this, however, for this video has already been done, and I'm now on my way into the upper part of the orbit. Since the focus of this video is mostly on the EMS, we'll kind of skip all the details around these things. But the first thing here is that the program 61 and basically the 60s of the AGZ is designed to get you through the atmosphere. So this one will show me the impact point in coordinates on Earth, and then the R3 is showing me if I'm going through the atmosphere with heads up or heads down. So a plus or -1 here controls basically the initial lift vector as I go through at the atmosphere. So I'm just going to hit proceed here, and same with this data. So once we're in program 61, now 63, you will see that there's a couple of data points that will need to be addressed. So I have the pad here with me, and you can see that I've left everything out except for the EMS related data points. And this is basically what you will see here. So from the pad, I've received that the EMS R2GO should be 1264.2, and you can find that number here. These two numbers are the EMS setup numbers, 1264.2. So then I'll use Swerp 211. To enter that into R1, and then the velocity, the calculated velocity at 0.5 g is 36215. So these are the two values that I see in this section here on the pad. So what I will do now is to go ahead and set this up correctly. So range set, still in standby mode. The function is set to range set after performing test 5. That's kind of the last step in the EMS entry tests procedures you do initially before entry. And it's typically left at range set in standby mode. So what I will do now is to set this to the range. And that's 1264. And you can hold the mouse button in to do it quickly. 64.2. And you can also see that in the pad a little bit easier. And then the velocity, then I'll go and set the initial velocity once we hit the atmosphere. This is typically starting at 37 feet per second after the tests. So then all you need to do is to move this slightly forward to kind of the initial entry velocity. So that's V0, the velocity at entry interface, or 0.5 g basically. And then I'm ready, so I'll set the mode, I'll leave the mode in standby, and I set the function to entry. And everything should now be set up for monitoring my descent. Then I'll quickly just skip through program 62, that's the separation. And then program 63 automatically starts if I'm in the correct-ish attitude. And my entry attitude should be about 150. And then we've already detected the 0.5 G. So then I can set the mode to normal. And if I now take a look, you can see that the lift vector is in a heads down position. My heads are going down towards Earth, and this produces lift vector up. And this test right after 0.5 G shows me that my lift vector was supposed to be up, and then I don't need to make any changes. Now this entry monitoring scribe will draw my current entry path with related to g-forces, 0g and 9g in the bottom, and then the velocity. So then I will use roll to kind of control my entry trajectory. And keep in mind that this is the way that you control the forces during entry. So the lift vector can be used to guide and steer the capsule through the atmosphere. And you can see that now my lift vector is making me kind of go upwards in the atmosphere in a way, or reduce my g-load and vertical speed, and eventually make me skip out of the atmosphere. So if I keep the velocity and that you can see here, 30, 29, 28, and if you keep the up vector, you will see that the velocity, if I climb up, will slow down, and if I go down into the atmosphere, it will kind of increase, but so does the g-forces. So now I'm rotating the capsule to kind of heads up orientation, and then that will basically make the lift vector point down, which will make me dive into the atmosphere. So the further down I'm into the atmosphere, the more lift it will produce, because the atmosphere is much more dense, and right now I'm quite high up, so I'm not producing a lot of thrust. Now I'm basically skipping a little bit out of the atmosphere, but not far. There's a very important milestone here, and that's the line here, which is 26, between 26 and 25. 25,500 feet per second is basically what it requires the capsule to have to be in a circular orbit. So if you skip out of the atmosphere too fast and too early with a lot of upwards velocity, you will actually skip out on an elliptical orbit that will take you far away from Earth. Eventually you will hit the atmosphere again, but that's so far in the future, many hours, that most of the consumables on board, like oxygen and battery life, would be depleted. So you want to avoid skipping out of the atmosphere, but you don't want to go through the atmosphere too quickly with the lift vector down, because this will increase your g-load, and if you exceed 12 g's, the crew will basically not survive the entry. Now I'm diving straight back into the atmosphere with my lift vector pointing directly down. This means that I'm now rapidly moving down into the denser part of the atmosphere, and it's very important to be very careful about your lift vector here, because you don't have that much energy left to correct your the steepness of your trajectory through the atmosphere. So it's very easy to exceed the g-load at this final dive into the atmosphere. Like I'm doing now, I'm going quite heavily into the lower part of the atmosphere with high g-forces. So I'm currently experiencing soon 7 g's. 9 g's is probably something that I will hit now, yeah. But I've got my lift vector up so I can control this slightly, and now you can see that my g-force is getting relieved as I reduce the vertical velocity. So that means that I can probably roll a little bit more to even out the lift vector. it's not possible to skip out after you kind of pass the 25,500 feet per second mark. So from there on, all you need to do is to keep your G load, but also try to hit the predicted range to the splashdown point. So for example, now I'm getting quite close to where I wanted to land, but you can see that the nautical miles isn't reducing that fast anymore because of my reduced velocity. So I'll try to kind of extend this one for a little bit by keeping my lift vector up, so I can kind of keep reduce the speed that I'm falling down towards Earth as I go forward. It's perfectly normal that you run out of the pattern at these velocities. Past 4,000 feet per second, there's nothing much more left to do. And if you're fine on G-force, there's nothing that can basically go wrong anymore, and you will eventually hit the ocean. So now all you need to do is to monitor the altitude, make sure that the ELS, the Earth landing systems, are powered, that the ELS logic switch is set to on and in auto, because that will deploy the chutes as we enter the correct altitudes. And now I'm closing down to the drogue chute altitude, so then I can set the EMS modes all to standby and off. Right, there comes the rogues. It's always good to visually see the drogues as well. Then you can pay attention to the altitude here, and then the chutes will come out at about 10,000 feet of altitude. That's your main chutes. Typically, you would want to manually also deploy these at the correct altitude in case auto fails. So quickly to sum up, there's a couple of instructions here for setting up the EMS before you enter. Perform the tests 1, 2, 3, 4 according to the checklists, and test 5, and leave the function switch to range set. If you want to skip these steps, make sure you do not skip step 5 and then set it to range set. So once you're in range set and you received the entry pad and you have all the data that you need, go ahead and insert the predicted range. Let's just check if the chutes come out. There we go. Main chutes are out. Yeah, then set this to range set. Make sure that the mode is in standby. Set the R2Go variable into the range. Move the scroll to your predicted range, velocity. That's 36,300 for lunar trajectory and around 25,500 for Earth entry. Keep it still in standby and then set it to entry. Once 0.5 G is detected, set this to normal. This is typically program 64, which is basically the upper part of the atmosphere. Once the upper part of the atmosphere is detected, this is in normal mode and will kind of monitor your entry in terms of g-forces relative to remaining velocity and range to go. And then you can use the RSI needle to control your up or down lift vector as you fly through the atmosphere. If you like this video and if you want me to create more kind of mini tutorials on how to fly the Mercury spacecraft, Gemini spacecraft, or the command module / lunar module in the Apollo program, please hit that subscribe button and like and comment with any feedback you might have. And I'll hope to see you in my next video. So thanks again for playing Re-Entry.